Welcome to When Spreadsheets Hit the Fan, a Birdview podcast. This is a show for leaders in fast-growing professional service organizations looking for the latest conversations around service delivery best practices. Let's get into the show.
Hello, and welcome to When Spreadsheets Hit the Fan. I'm your host, John Litterick. In today's episode, I talked to Ryan Schram, who is the President and Chief Operating Officer of IZEA. IZEA is the leading provider of influencer marketing technology, data, and services for innovative brands. As a NASDAQ-traded company, Ryan's role at IZEA encompasses a range of responsibilities, including direct oversight of its revenue growth, client service, customer success, system security, mergers, acquisitions, workplace culture, and talent acquisition. Ryan is a very busy man. Prior to joining IZEA in September 2011 as the company's first ever Chief Marketing Officer, Ryan served in roles of advancing responsibility at Dentsu's Merkle, CBS Westwood One, and iHeartMedia. Here's a fun fact about Ryan. He is an M&M cookie addict connoisseur. His words, not mine. When he travels for work, Ryan will often stop at the city's local top bakery and have them deliver their product to his hotel to sample. What is his favorite M&M cookie, you might ask? Well, currently, the reigning champ in Ryan's mind is the Midnight Cookie Company in Seattle, Washington. If I ever go to Seattle, I'm going to get that cookie. On today's episode, we discuss things like how to avoid major hiring mistakes when selecting job candidates to interview, the importance of when you are hiring a new employee to understand which type of soft skills are relevant to your business, and of course, Ryan's Excel spreadsheet story. If you like what you hear, please follow the show and leave a rating wherever you're listening. Let's jump right into it. Well, Ryan, you've been around the proverbial block hundreds of times, just like, all of our guests. I always like to open with that statement and, qualify your experience. So let's get right into it. What's the biggest mistake you see organizations doing, and what should they stop right now?
Well, John, first, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be with you today and on your audience. My advice to your listeners is that they should stop hiring strictly for pedigree and start hiring for more soft skills that actually matter in an agile business today.
I see. Yes. Good advice. I'm already interested in how this is going to go and play out because I've seen that in my 25 plus years in the IT world. All right. But for Ryan, for our listening audience, can you give me a specific example of where you've seen this mistake of hiring strictly for pedigree? And what was the negative impact on the organization in terms of tangible things such as revenue and resources? We're also interested, our listening audience is also interested in intangible things like what would be the negative impact on brand and reputation.
Sure, of course. I think that we have to understand that this has been, the last 3 years, arguably the greatest challenge for business operators in modern history, right? The number of variables being thrown at all of us continue to change, and I have a feeling will continue to change throughout 2023 as well. But putting that aside for a second, when you look at growth businesses overall, particularly those that leverage a fair amount of MarTech, I think it's natural from a hiring mentality perspective to want to get new talent that have worked at quote unquote big name businesses in a prior life. And which is fine, superficially, I suppose, John. But the reality is that in many cases, there's a bunch of unintended consequences that come out of the desire, or I should say the tendency of being overly myopic to only hire from big name businesses. One of the biggest is around the topic of workplace culture. And culture for me, I don't know about you, John, is kind of a trigger word because unfortunately it's a throwaway. It's used to describe so many things, both important and frankly irrelevant, all at the same time, that it oftentimes ends up not really resonating with people. I love the meme that floats around of the workplace culture, and it's a shot of like this gray cubicle with a sad looking computer and nothing else in it when people are describing their company. But I look at this modern era of remote and hybrid work, and I consider workplace culture fit to be one of the most important foundational areas for a company. And that workplace culture, ultimately, if you want to use a different phrase, is a belief system. It is the things that while everyone is different and comes from different backgrounds, they're the things that really resonate with the entirety of a workforce and shape the mindset of not just how you do the work, but why you do the work. And that comes into another situation when you tend to focus on individuals that have that pedigree. Big businesses also can have some big problems that are easily masked by scale. And one of those tends to be around accountability and work ethic. Don't get me wrong, I've come from big businesses myself, so I'd be a hypocrite to say that there aren't people that can cut through this, but there is a mentality of sort of just working through the motions of the business, but not having to have individualized accountability or the work ethic to fuel that accountability when it matters most. And let's face facts. I think in this era of inflation and businesses belt tightening, the reality is there are just going to be less people to do the same or more work at organizations. They are going to turn to tools to be able to help them make that come to life. But if they don't have the work ethic to figure out how to connect those dots and galvanize that opportunity and be accountable for when things work well and don't work well, that can really jar the workplace culture holistically. And then it comes down to, lastly, really helping hiring managers define what meaningful contribution should or should not be. I've seen this play out a number of negative ways, one of which is that you bring someone in who seemingly checks all of the boxes on the CV or the resume that you're looking for, but in reality, the proper amount of due diligence had not really been conducted to understand the specificity of that background or that skill set. And in the end, when you really get into it, it's every bit as much as the company's fault as it may be the candidate's fault for hiring fast to accommodate a need, as opposed to what I like to call dating before getting married. The best hires are people who you really get to know, you understand the context, you connect the dots with their resume, and last and most importantly, you get that feeling that the best hiring managers have, which is the sense of the barometer for chemistry. Will this person align not only with our belief system, but will this person also really fit in to the belief system of their immediate colleagues horizontally and vertically in an organization?
Yeah, well said. In my 25 years, I've seen all of those pitfalls that you've described by when you hire strictly for pedigree. I can think of a whole number of examples right now where someone was hired because they were a top-notch salesperson, but it was a different type of product, and they couldn't make the translation to the new product. It required a different set of beliefs, mindsets, different steps. Right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I've seen that a lot.
The adage that I've heard frequently is that, if you consider different types of skill sets in the professional field of medicine, you probably wouldn't want the same person who is doing your annual exam or writing you a script when you have a bad cold being the same person who would operate on you if you had a brain tumor, yeah, right? There's a difference between a GP and a neurologist. They're all doctors, but there is a difference for a reason. The same would be true for salespeople, marketing professionals. The list goes on and on.
Yeah, absolutely. And using that example, you could have like the highest pedigree neurosurgeon, right? But would they be a good medical technician out in a war zone, which is going to require a whole totally different kind of mindset than a sterile clinical environment, right? It's a much different kind of environment. So it's true in any field, right? So I think our listening audience are thinking about that, when they've hired for pedigree, it didn't work out, and what they need to, to think about. So let's get into that. What should organizations do instead? Not just strictly hire for pedigree. Pedigree is important, but what should they do as well in conjunction?
I think the first thing is really defining what soft skills may matter most to your organization and help that start to parse what you may read on a resume in the application phase of someone joining a firm, all the way down to the interview process itself. I think this is particularly important in how that involvement will translate in this era of remote and hybrid work and just the change in how we do work overall. Some of the soft skills that we look for at IZEA are the ones that may be seemingly obvious, but you'd be amazed how fast people jump over them. How does this person prefer to manage their time? You can call that time management, of course, but we all structure our days in different ways. And if you are having an individual who's very, very good at getting things done, but is not communicative in real time over a platform like Slack or Teams and doesn't have that immediacy effect to the way that they do their work, that may be incongruent with the belief system or the workplace culture of the people they're joining. As just one simple way of looking at it. That then goes down to the philosophies around adaptability and flexibility. It's easy to say, "Oh, yeah, I'm really flexible, John. Whatever you need from me, I'm just excited to be here." It's like, okay, but let's talk about situations where you've been forced to adapt to something that you couldn't control. What happens when you have to adapt to something that you didn't quite see that you should have, and you've learned from it? Those kinds of drill down questions, I think, go back to the thought process of the individual, not just necessarily their willingness to align themselves to a certain adjective.
Yeah, no, it's really resonating with me. I didn't cut you off, but what popped into my head, and I always felt like, when you're hiring a salesperson, for instance, having them be able to do a little improv skit to show they can think on their feet quickly and they can take in data and frame a story from it quickly. That's as part of the hiring process for adaptability. I think that's really important. And I can't even really think in my whole career, anytime I've hired someone or I've been hired or stories with friends, anybody's really thought about doing that. So I think that's a real pearl of wisdom that you're providing, right? Love to hear how you if you don't mind sharing how your company does it, that'd be interesting as well.
Absolutely. It depends on the position, and it really runs in the face of what we see happening more broadly in our industry and in the broader marketing and advertising industry, which is this tendency to understand there is a war on talent. And everyone wants to fill positions quickly because that candidate may choose to do something across the street. That's totally understandable. We start by looking at that candidate's availability as a gift of their time. And we don't, use time on things that we can cover off on our own or do electronically. When we do have the live cycles with that person, we really force ourselves to not do what I think 90% of most companies do, which is just walk through someone's resume in reverse and ask them a couple of generalized questions about this position and why do they want to work here. That's pretty much interviewing 101. And I gotta tell you, I don't know about you, John, but like when headhunters have called me over the years and they start doing that, it gives me all the signals that this is a rushed hire, not something where they're actually interested in understanding how I think or how my mindset can contribute towards that organization's growth. So we started there. We also let people know that we may choose to have a series of a larger quantity of shorter conversations. Think about how most interviews are. It's a half hour or an hour long. You try to knock everything out. There may be a semifinalist or finalist round, and having multiple people in multiple rounds who may have not been part of the previous ones. It creates all sorts of disconnects. Instead, using that philosophy of dating before getting married, you think about that as, that initial conversation, we probably have 10 or 15 minutes of some really focused questions to ask you so we can understand clarifications, perhaps, starting to get into some of these soft skills. And then, the next conversation may be talking more about situational awareness. Tell me about this experience. Let's talk about things that may be a little uncomfortable and see how people respond. And then thirdly, bring it all together. We've learned this about how you look at the world. Here are the business challenges that we're encountering and why this position exists. Let's start to fit this in and talk about what that would mean day to day. And also where we see potential pratfalls no matter who the candidate is, putting them at ease. And then maybe the fourth one is really talking about moving forward and what the actual compensation or other kinds of incentives may be for the position. That whole process may in fact add up to a half hour or an hour, but we do it in such a way to be able to really keep those conversations tight and focused, and also see if the candidate changes at all especially with these soft skills, from conversation to conversation, because let's also be real, any person can put on a great show once. When you start to be able to talk to somebody repeatedly, you get a better sense of who they really are.
Yeah, I think this is really, really, really gold. Like, I'm loving what I'm hearing. And I think anybody that's listening that's involved in hiring or, when they're thinking about the directives to give their human resources department, I think you've given them some really good things to think about here. So I know you've already done it. Most guests don't start out already doing what I'm going to ask, but I'm going to get you to repeat it. In one sentence, can you boil it down to a simple maxim, what you would stop and what you would start?
Absolutely. So just stop hiring strictly for that resume pedigree. Start hiring for these soft skills, starting with emotional intelligence.
Beautiful. Love it. Good stuff. Okay. So this is the part of the show where we know, what you believe our listening audience out there should stop doing, what they should start doing, but now we want to understand the theory. Okay. So Ryan, it's when you say it, it's so obvious, right? But yet we know people miss the obvious. So why are organizations missing this? What's driving this, set of mistakes? Is it the tyranny of the urgent to hire, or is it something else?
I think it's very easy to wave your hand and say, absolutely. There's just incredible pressures right now, John. We have to move fast. And when we move fast, we break things. And that's just the way the world works. I personally think that's lazy and probably a bit ignorant. The first thing I will say is that I get it. People who are responsible for talent acquisition at firms, whether that happens to be an HR department, a recruiting department, using outsourced recruiting, the hiring managers themselves. Yes, everyone is time-starved and being pulled in a lot of different directions. This is also one of those places where technology, is very useful, but can also make really smart people look very stupid very quickly. The rise of applicant tracking systems, I think, is another great example of what has masked and created this mentality of looking for keywords in resumes. So now what you've basically done is you've almost trained candidates to make sure that their resumes are so overly generic and so streamlined so they get picked up by these ATS systems as being a high profile candidate, that you've actually eliminated some of the real storytelling behind that candidate's eligibility for your position.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just quick story. I learned early on, if I put out a resume, it needs to have the words President's Club in it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I totally resonate with what you're saying.
Yes. That's the irony behind it, again, is like everyone is very much focused on, all right, we need throughput. We need candidates for this thing. What are the requirements for the position? I would be willing to make a friendly bet that if you were to look at the vast majority of applicants for white-collar jobs here in 2022, they are focusing 95% plus of their resume talking strictly about professional stops and almost nothing about the things that I think that matter the most. When we're talking about emotional intelligence, another great way of thinking about that for hiring managers, HR professionals, is mental toughness, right? What is the commitment, the confidence, the control, the challenge of these individuals and their grit when time gets tough? Because, even the biggest businesses, the most successful businesses, when you look at them from the outside looking in, seemingly, are always doing great things, always doing amazing stuff. The truth behind the scenes is that there's always ebbs and flows in any business. And so when you start to overly generalize a candidacy of a team member, or you gloss over the core ingredients of that grit that your team has built that's already installed, you very quickly can draw yourself as a recruiter or a hiring manager to focus on what I call lookalikes. A great candidate for us would be the CMO of Peloton. They have this great brand identity and people love them. But I'm a B2B software business. That's a B2C fitness company. Like, how are those two things congruent? It's like, well, but the pedigree of this person, you have to understand, they're a brilliant marketer, and look at all the things that they've done. It's like, but there's more to it than just that. There has to be that next level down of how does it align philosophically as much as it does functionally. I'd also add, John, that it's really unfortunate. I think that sometimes talent acquisition groups are kept at an arm's length, oddly, away from hiring managers and away from company leadership that's trying to shape a lot of the workplace culture attributes that we're talking here, right? It's like they're the afterthought, which is so strange when most executives, if you listen to earnings calls, CEOs say one of their biggest challenges is talent acquisition and retention. Yet at the same time, the very individuals who are responsible for being the welcome mat and the gathering point for those organizations are actually not exposed to any of the strategy or any of the actual opportunities for improvement until way after the fact.
Oh, yeah. That, again, seen that lots of times.
So this sounds all pretty familiar to you.
Yeah.
Resonating,
yeah.
Huh?
I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people, yeah.
The other thing I'd say lastly is like, look, I get it. Even when organizations start to realize these things and they are able to do a better job in framing how they look at and evaluate candidates, there still may be the things about the human condition that come up, unclear expectations, poor communication of who's really responsible for what. And being able to unearth those insights, I've heard from many of my peers that sometimes they may have a really well-tuned date before getting married process, but then the information that was gathered from, say, conversation number 3 wasn't properly cross-communicated against all the people responsible for that candidate, and something gets missed. And that happens. But it comes back to that's where systems are equally important internally as they are externally sometimes to make sure that the entire sphere of knowledge on the potential of someone and those insights that are drawn out from quality conversation are properly digested by everybody that needs to be in.
Wow, this is great stuff. I normally ask our guests a few more questions around the theory, but I'm actually going to skip a lot of those because you got I think our guests want to hear like how you would do this. But just one final question on the theory. Like in your opinion, if someone started doing the right behavior, that you're advising, how quickly do you think they might see these benefits?
The great news is that they can come up pretty quickly, John. I mean, the truth of the matter is that candidates also appreciate these things. We've been talking, so far in today's chat about the benefits to the business. I think candidates are worn out too right now, right? Even the ones that may be looking at this strictly as career advancement or monetary advancement, but even the ones that you'd really want, which are looking at this as a career building opportunity or a springboard for bigger things, everyone knows what that experience feels like when you go into an interview with a company you really admire on the outside looking in, and it's disappointing. It makes you feel that pit in your stomach of, gosh, I really think that this business does great things or it meets a specific need, but those interviewers were so flat, or they just basically walked me through the resume that I'd already taken the time to build and that their ATS had given me a gold star from because I used the right keywords or all of the above, right? So I think that the most important thing for everyone to realize that's listening today is that these small changes can have very profound impacts internally. They don't take a lot to do. They may take a lot to do actually, not from an effort standpoint, but actually shifting the mindset of the people involved to say, let's just reframe this a little bit differently. I read recently a body of research that if you alter something as little as 10% of the cadence of your hiring process, it actually increases the quality of the hire and the stickiness of that hire staying around for a while by 75 to 80%.
Wow, that's a heck of a multiplier.
It really is.
10 to 75. That's a good one. Okay, great. This is good. I mean, it reminds me of a saying, tempus consumet res creare. Takes time to do things right?
It does. It takes time to, be able to make the observations come to life. And I do think that there are those abilities to make quick change, but also to realize that this is a change management discovery, journey, and learning laboratory for most organizations. We talked about earlier in the conversation about big companies. Big companies have a lot of great big assets and the ability to draw a lot of great talent. They also, and maybe stereotypically, can be organizations where it just takes more time to make change come to life. But that's, in my opinion, why it's so important for C-level executives to help lead this conversation, not follow it. In fact, if you talk to most organizations at the different levels, you'll hear that there is definitive situational awareness from some hiring managers, but they feel like they're going off the book, quote unquote, by trying something different. Or the people responsible for talent acquisition, they're saying to themselves, well, yeah, I run into this all the time, but our COO just doesn't believe in this stuff. She's old school. This is the way we've always done it, and I don't want to make anybody upset. I think the important thing is for people not to get discouraged if it does take more time. This is one of those weird conundrums. It's a paradox where absolutely, tempus consumet res cruere. It does take time to make things sometimes, and I say that to people so they don't get discouraged in organizations that maybe need more of that transformation than others. But for those, whether they're big or they're small, if they can just take the time to press the reset button a bit, you can see very profound change with just that little bit of incremental effort.
Wow, this is good. Yeah, this was a really fun conversation for me. I can just, the wheels are spinning in my mind about all the different hiring mistakes because people have hired for pedigree that I've seen. And what this last thing that you're sort of saying for the person being hired, I've seen a lot of people get hired and, when they start the job a week in, they're saying like, I didn't know this is what the job was going to be. This wasn't indicated in the hiring interview and there's misalignment. So yeah, this is good. I think the thoroughness of what you're recommending for hiring is important. I think we have time for you to give us like maybe one more insight about how you could put this into action. And then I want to hear your best Excel story.
Sure, you got it. So I think the first thing is try to democratize this process. If you're listening to this conversation today and you're a hiring manager and you're feeling these things, use the channels and raise your hand to say, I think that there are inches all around us to do this better. And if you're a senior executive, C-level, VP, doesn't matter, look at this as an opportunity to bring everyone together and realign vertically and horizontally on how to embrace this perspective, particularly if you think that your organization could be doing a better job. And that starts, I think, fundamentally with making sure that your recruiting and talent acquisition personnel are not just falling in line and certainly not ostracized, but helping develop this process. They are the ones that are the proverbial welcome wagon to your organization. They are not just resume bots digging through stuff off of an ATS. They are selling the company's vision. So think about it from the simple aspect of if they don't feel like they can sell what the belief system is, and they don't feel like they can sell that they're just not hiring to meet a quota, why would you think that the person or persons that those individuals are trying to hire are actually going to be successful and stay with your business long term? The secondary thing I would do is really break down your CV requirements well beyond just job stops and what that person's going to do day to day. Think about the intangibles. Think about what that person's contributions will feel like from a human psychology perspective, right? Does this person need to be empathetic? Are they being brought in to be a challenger? Are they being brought in to help unite efforts? Are they being brought in because, look, it's a tough economy right now and costs are needing to be cut and we need to find a way to be more efficient on the other side? That requires different aspects of emotional intelligence and that mental toughness that we were talking about that I rarely, if ever, see in a job posting requirement, because companies are almost ashamed to admit that these are not just roles that a robot is sitting in, but a living, breathing human being that has feelings and emotions and behaviors and a psychology that wraps them all around. And then lastly, like I said before, I would challenge everyone to change the quote unquote traditional interview process. Use these mix of new qualifiers, restructure the types of conversations, really value that candidate's time. I know it might seem easier if schedules are hard internally to block out 4 15-minute sections as opposed to one 1-hour section. But it also goes back to the rhetorical question of, if the blocker is the hiring organization and not the candidate's availability, then the company is the problem, right? The value of time for a new hire is the problem. And you're completely at that point dismissing the costs of a bad hire, which I read last year in 2021 approached over $50 billion in North America alone.
Wow.
$50 billion.
Wow. That's amazing. Just great advice. I love it. I think anybody listening to this, they gotta, a light bulb's gotta go on. I know it's gone on for me. I mean, just for me personally, the light bulb that went on is the importance of giving your HR team enough time to do all this, right? One of the things, that we do at our company, Birdview, is we help schedule out resource management. What are you going to need from a people skills point of view in the future? Well, the more lead time you can give your HR people, then the more time they have to do these excellent best practices that you're talking about, right? If you only give them a day to do it, they can't do it, right? Even though there are best practices. So that's the light bulb that's going on in my head. You got to have these best practices, and then you have to have enough time to do them, right? Know when to do them.
That's right. I mean, it is a function of time, and we as a society, are of the mindset that everything has to happen instantaneous. And I'm here to tell you, you can hire people very quickly if you want to. You will likely also lose them just as quickly as a result.
Absolutely. Well, it's good. Well, as the name of the show is, When Spreadsheets Hit the Fan, we always want to hear a good or bad Excel spreadsheet story from our guest.
This is a good one. So I'm dating myself a bit here, John, admittedly, but flashback to me circa 2005, all right?
Okay.
I worked at a company that will remain nameless right now, but you can look up my LinkedIn profile. And we had a really, really, really fancy spreadsheet that happened to leverage a ton of macros.
I've heard this before. Yeah, I think I know where this is going. Yeah,
and to kind of help everyone think about that day and age, Wi-Fi was just coming in as being a thing around our building. It was a Windows network. Everyone's using PCs. The long and the short of it is that our really fancy macros, in a relative short order, because everyone was using this same shared spreadsheet, managed to completely take down an entire series of Windows-based laptops because of a bad call that was built in the macro that impacted Windows OS and literally nuked those boxes. So you can imagine how we felt like we were doing a great thing that turned into a bad thing very, very, very quickly.
Yeah, you're the second guest to talk about the Excel macros.
Oh, see, I'm not alone. I guess it's a good and a bad thing.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm convinced we could have run the space shuttle off that spreadsheet, honestly, at the time, if we wanted to.
Yeah, we've some of the ones that I've seen come in, where people are like, could you convert this into your software? It's like, wow, it's like reading War and Peace. How did you get that many columns?
I mean, again, I give all of the grace to the good people at Microsoft where they thought that putting, Visual Basic into a spreadsheet was a great idea until they realized that it was a step too far with their own operating system.
Yeah, there you go. Good stuff. All right. Well, Ryan, it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope you'll consider being a guest in the future. This was good stuff. Thank you so much.
Oh, it was my pleasure, John. I'll be happy to be back whenever your listeners would like to have me.
You've been listening to When Spreadsheets Hit the Fan, a Birdview podcast. Keep connected with us by subscribing to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you like what you've heard, please rate the show. That helps us to keep delivering the latest and best practices for professional service teams. Until next time.